thank you to our sponsors, Little Voices. Are you a teacher with a passion for drama, music and performance, or feeling stuck in the classroom? Little Voices gives you the chance to step into a role where you can truly inspire young minds through the arts. This is a company I know well and admire. They're passionate about child development, highly rated and genuinely transformative. With small group teaching, a focus on confidence and creativity, with the opportunity to guide children through Lambda qualifications, you can make a real impact. Plus, with the support of a nationwide franchise network behind you, you can run your own successful business, doing what you love while teaching in a way that truly fits your life. Hello, lovely listeners, and thank you for pressing play. This has been recorded in July, August 2025. So, technically, school's out for summer. And Sarah and I, still teachers to the very core, are taking a little bit of time off. But we still want something dropping regularly to you. So we've chosen a few of our favourite episodes. We've loved doing all of our podcasts, but we've chosen a couple that have really struck chords with our listeners, that have had a huge impact, and we're going to revisit them. There'll be a couple of special episodes as well. This may even be one of them where me and Sarah are chewing the fat. So yes, we're putting our feet up. So sit back and enjoy what we've got for you. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the Pit Pony Podcast with myself, Sharon Corley,
and me, Sarah Dunwood,
in which we talk to teachers from all walks of life who exited the classroom from what they thought was a job for life and thrived on the other side of teaching. Coming up in this episode,
I knew it was just like, like the way you push up to get out of a drowning pool. I just knew my legs just took me out of that building. And I packed my bag and I walked to the office and I said, you're going to need to cover me for the rest of the day because I'm leaving site. And I was clearly anxious. I was in a state of anxiety. And the office staff just looked at me and went, well, we couldn't cover you for period 5, so you have to come back for that. And I said, no, I'm leaving. I'm not coming back. And I got in my car and I was shaking so much, but I knew I needed to get off site. So I drove to this car park and I rang my GP, and straight away, they kind of booked me in for the afternoon. They said, and I rang my friends and they said, just get home.
hello, and welcome to an episode of the Pit Pony Podcast with Hannah Jones. So, Hannah came from good old-fashioned Pit Pony stock. Her dad was her head of sixth form and a history A-level teacher. Her mum was a TA. And they didn't shoehorn her into education, but they recognised early doors that she'd make a fantastic teacher. And they were right. She spent her early years abroad in China, English as a second language with the British Council. And then she came back to the UK and was an assistant house mistress. Now, there are going to be so many more questions than answers to this. But the first school she worked at in the UK, the girls had their own stables there with their ponies in, so you could bring your own pony to school day, your BYOP. So the pupils could traipse their ponies in front of the pit ponies. I love it. But what you could have had if you'd got generational wealth. And she worked there, loved it. And then she was so lucky through a skit to train at Watford Girls' Grammar School under the inspirational Dame Helen Hyde, a history teacher, amazing, the Edward de Bono thinking school that was utterly off the charts in terms of creativity. Her NQT year was at the boys' school, Watford Grammar. She relocated to a school in Birmingham, again another grammar school, loved every single minute of that experience. And it was there that she had her child. And sadly, Hannah's child was born with cerebral palsy. But at that school, the entire staff raised £1,000 for the neonatal intensive care unit. So we've had a really glorious career up until this point. Hannah is in this for life. There's no two ways about it. But after a relocation to Yorkshire, at a good school by her own admission, she lasted 4 months, walked out, and has never gone back. So Hannah, welcome and thank you.
Thanks
Hannah,
for having me.
you're welcome. What's your job title today?
So I have just accepted and will be shortly starting what I think of my dream job as a teacher who's no longer a teacher, and I will be head of prison education in England and Wales. So I work for the civil service.
Wow, we feel like we're in the company of greatness, do we not, Sarah Dunwood? If anyone can throw that type, if you put head of in England and Wales in it, you're big. So thank you so much. BYOP.
It was quite the shock. I was with the British Council in China, and they always place you in schools that ultimately couldn't afford English language teachers otherwise. And I essentially arrived off the plane we lived essentially, it was like an industrial estate in China. I arrived off the plane to Heathrow, and I had to drive up to this school because I'd not interviewed in person. They'd given me the job, but I needed to get there to meet them in person too. And my brain just could not fathom the differences I had just seen, to this like rural, beautiful BYOP. But I had a lovely year there. It was absolutely fab. So some of my best anecdotes come from working there.
And I think you experienced good years in teaching. There's no two ways about it. As is always the case, I want to start at the end, and I want to go back to those 4 months. Start to share with us the arc of your story in many ways. Take us to the time where you relocated to Yorkshire, please, and walk us through your experience at the school in Yorkshire.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was 2021. I'd had my second child in May 2020. So I'd been on maternity leave for most of lockdown. And in about March 2021, I was living in Birmingham at the time with 2 small children, and kind of turned to my husband one night and said, I'd really like to move. I'm from the north. I wanted to be near my mum and dad, and we just decided to go for it. And so applying for jobs, and obviously this is then still through kind of lockdown. It was just when lockdown was starting to lift. I got offered a job at a really good on paper school and accepted it happily because we were so excited to move, and it's a permanent contract and helped me get my mortgage. And we found a house in a beautiful village, and I enrolled my little boys in the local, one was in like the local nursery. He was just 1. And the other, my Henry, who's the one with cerebral palsy, he had a stroke at birth. Now cerebral palsy, he started at a preschool. So we moved into the house at the beginning of August, and obviously started the new school in September. I applied for my first job out of teaching on day 2 of being in that school.
Wow.
Yeah. I think straight away it was just, you just know, it's that trusting your instinct, isn't it? I just knew something wasn't right. I knew that this wasn't a healthy place for me. And so, yeah, I think kind of thinking through it. So I always get emotional when I'm thinking about it. It was, teaching for me was everything. It was me. I was a teacher. And so at the end of it to come quite so suddenly is still quite emotional for me to think about. So my classroom, I think the big issue straight away was the classroom they put me in, and I was timetabled full time in this one room, had no windows at all. So there was no natural light. There was a tiny skylight that used to just shut if it was raining. So you couldn't get any fresh air. There was no natural light. That didn't give any natural light to the room. It was the dingiest room you can possibly imagine. I think if you walked into a prison and saw that room, you'd be like, this is disgusting. And the idea that I could teach in there, I just couldn't get my head around that they thought that was acceptable to put anybody in there. You wouldn't leave animals in a zoo in that. And so right from the get-go, I had to kind of fight for myself. So I was new to Yorkshire, new to the school, didn't have any kind of friends or support network here. So it's a huge transition anyway. And then straight away from day one going, this isn't an appropriate room for me to be teaching in. This isn't safe. We're still at this point teaching in masks. We're being warned about the dangers of COVID. And I was just being told repeatedly by, male senior leaders in very nice offices with floor to ceiling windows that this room had passed all health and safety standards. It was fine. So anyway, I applied for a job straight away on day 2. I decided not to go to continue with it. I got offered an interview, but it was a huge pay cut. And I thought, no, I just need to, maybe this is just settling in anxiety. Maybe I just need to kind of get my head around it. Over kind of September, October, November, my absence started to creep up. My little boy, my youngest, was just 1. He'd been in lockdown for his first year of life and had gone to nursery. So as you can imagine, the germs were everywhere in our house. And it was at that time when they were saying, if you've got a cough, you need to be out for 5 days or you need to do a COVID test. And that would take a few days to come back. So we were totally stuck between me and my husband. He had to have a lot of time off as well. He is and was at the time a civil servant working for the Treasury. And so he was able to be a little bit more flexible than I was. But it was just kind of this constant, juggling of priorities. So it was stressful from the get-go. My little boy, Henry, with cerebral palsy, was in a preschool environment as well. And that was really hard for him. He'd been in nursery where he'd been, loved and cherished and kind of babied. And he's very young. He's got developmental delay as well. And so the preschool transition was really hard. And every morning I had to kind of rush as you do, because I have to be there on time. So rush everyone out, rush everyone in, no time for a supportive transition for him, just me kind of getting panicked. And then just driving away, and every day kind of my heart breaking as I was driving away, knowing that I wasn't properly supporting him, knowing that I was going to be probably late to school. And it was just this kind of a massive anxiety. And I think that could have been managed if I'd been, say, how I was in Birmingham and in that kind of school where they saw me and they understood my kind of role as a carer. They knew I had a disabled child, but there was never any additional support given to that. So they knew because I'd requested not full-time working. So I had 4 days a week that was kind of given to me. That was like, we're really helping because you're having 4 days a week. But apart from that, there was no other flexibilities allowed. And I very quickly reached my kind of policy given dependence leave days off, because also I have appointments and stuff I need to take him to. And I started getting, told I wasn't going to be paid, etc. So it quite quickly turned into a bit of a battle with them. But the school itself, so not a very welcoming environment. In about November or even December, somebody randomly turned up at my room and said, "Oh, I'm meant to be your buddy." And I said, "Oh, what?" And they're like, "Oh, I was meant to welcome you to the school." And I think it was about December. And I was like, "Oh," and I nearly, I'm not a rude person, but I think I nearly told them to F off, because I was just like, at this point, that's just rude to come in and be like, "Oops, I have
welcome."
Yeah, welcome. You've been here for 3 months and really struggling on your own. The department they were nice. They were nice people. But it felt very much like they were an established team. I was the newcomer. I got the rubbish room, and the head of department who made that decision was like, "Oh yeah, well we know almost like passing the buck a lot." There was no sense of I'll help you and I'll help you support this.
Am I right in thinking that in order to try and stay there, you thought, okay, I am going to bang the drum and I'm going to get moved out of this room? So you went in, you stood your ground,
yeah,
and they came up with a solution for you, didn't they?
So for months they've been telling me there's nothing wrong with this room. You're making a fuss. And I got hold of one of those. Again, this is still 2021. So I got hold of one of those monitors that we all got, or some of the classrooms got, to show and mine immediately went off the charts. And the union said 800 was a bad number. Mine was 1600 straight away, within literally minutes of plugging it in. So I marched down to the deputy head's office, floor to ceiling windows, deputy head's office. And I said, I'm not teaching in this room any longer. This is not happening. This is now kind of early December time. I said, I can bring them in here. If you think it's fine, you can go and have my room as your office, and I'll bring them in here and be fine. And obviously they didn't want to do that. So the school I was in is a very big site, really sprawling, kind of like 1960s secondary modern type of buildings, sprawling buildings. And there was a building right kind of, about a mile, it felt like about a mile from the staff room, that had been condemned and was going to be knocked down in the Christmas break. And they said, oh, you can have a room in there. So for December, I was put on my own in a room that was actually condemned to be knocked down. There was nobody else in that building at all around me. And I had classes. So that I think fundamentally as well, like there was issues that I just couldn't agree with the school in the way that is on paper a very good school. And I think the way they manage that is that they stream every single class. So as a history teacher, I'm not used to teaching top, middle and bottom sets, right? But it's mixed ability. I'm not a maths teacher. This is how we teach is mixed ability. But no, in that school, everybody from like term 2 in year 7 was put on top, middle or bottom. And ultimately what it meant was if you had a special educational need, you were put in bottom set, and you would spend your day with that exact group of people, moving from room to room to room to room. So say, for example, my year 9 history group were the bottom set year 9s. I mean, year 9s anyway, challenging, aren't they? But bottom set year 9s, I think in that room I had 3 specific EHCPs, as well as everybody else had some kind of statement of need, individual educational plan. There was never, ever any TA with them. When I pushed and shouted, they would say, oh, we'll see if we can get the cover supervisor to come and sit with you. I think once, because I'd made such a fuss, one of the assistant pastoral heads came and sat with me to help me with them. There was just no support. So then taking me then away from my department, away from other teachers, just felt it wasn't a psychologically safe environment for anyone. It was almost at points not physically safe. But it was at this point, it was December. So I think I just downed tools and put my Netflix password in, and we merrily watched films for a couple of weeks.
And not only that, at the time, you'd gone through that period where I think you were in a school where teaching had to be taught the same way. So you'd gone from a very creative form of teaching to a kind of PowerPoint, standardization.
Yes. Why did they want me? I've got a master's degree in history and I qualified to one of the best schools in the country. And I just kept on thinking, why are you paying me? Why do you want me? You've not used my brain at all. At one point, I was told that I couldn't run the year 11 revision session because they didn't know I could teach exam classes. I'd been ahead of sixth form. Like, I was just, why have you paid me for this job? And it was, I mean, in one way, it made the job didn't make the job easier, but in one way, I could not plan lessons, right? Because they were there. And I suppose in one way, I think they'd done it for that kind of set. But there was no creativity. There was no sense of what I could do. It was teach them to the test, because we've got to justify these, who's going to be top, middle and bottom, teach them to the test. And then, so it kind of came to a head. So all of this kind of stress from home life, this ongoing pressure from school, this and then in January, so they'd knocked down the building I was in December, so that had gone. The 2 weeks I was there, that had gone. So I arrived back in January. Over the Christmas break as well, I'd been my anxiety, that environment is not healthy, and my mental health took such a hit in such a short space of time. So over Christmas, I was just having. I'd just be sitting on the sofa with my family and I could just feel this rising panic, and I'd have to just go upstairs and I would just be having this panic attack and I couldn't place what was going on. I think there was just so many different triggers. I think my little boy and kind of all the kind of PTSD from his birth and that trauma was coming out, and I think it was all down to this environment that I'd been in where my brain was just being stressed and then physically unhealthy in this horrible room. So I'd obviously been applying for jobs over the Christmas break. I'd been successful with the civil service in November. So I'd missed the deadline to hand my notice in. So they put me on the reserve list. I'd had an interview just before the Christmas break for a job I was really keen on, working at a university locally. And they rang me just before the Christmas break to say, we really, really liked you and you performed really well in this interview. But, and I know everyone listening will know what happens next, but there was just someone with more experience, but they left me hanging because they said, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create another role and we'll know by January if we can. And so I had this kind of like hope that I was actually going to get out. And that kept me going through Christmas. And I arrived back in January, and the plan that they'd put in place, because now they'd condemned this room and I'd refused to teach in my original room, was that as a department, we were all going to swap rooms. So there was like, we were all quite you. Well, wasn't I just? And so it was, yeah, I was teaching in lots of different rooms. There was just like mad moments where you just start to feel so isolated because clearly, you know, I'd hacked people off by making them teach in the nasty room.
Didn't they play not play games, but weren't they mean with the resources?
A little bit mean, girly. Yeah, it was there was just a couple of times. There was one day where I was teaching in this person's classroom, and actually I taught in there most of the day. It should have really been by right to my classroom. And I reached down to the pen pot that had always been there, and I realised it had been put away in a locked drawer. So that's where we got to. We got to kind of levels of petty. And again, it's the stress on the brain. So all those things sound like small, but it's when you are putting your brain through so much stress. Those things, like, I just felt just like punched in the gut day after day. And so then it was January. So I then had this phone call to say, sorry, we couldn't offer you this job. And I think I had also applied for like a tutoring job and got turned down. And I just remember sitting on the floor in my little boy's room while they were in the bath and saying to my husband, I cannot do this anymore. I can't keep going. And then we were like, well, we've got the mortgage to pay. And it's kind of like, what are we going to do? And then being January, it's a Holocaust Memorial Day, and often schools try and kind of time their teaching around to teach the Holocaust. So with my year nines, my lovely year nines, my bottom set year nines with 3 HCPs, a lot of need and no support, I was then given this kind of pack of worksheets to work through with them about the Holocaust. The Wednesday before, so we're working up now to the day where I walked out. So what happened was, it was generally the most dramatic thing I think I've ever done in my life, where I walked into school, I taught period 1, I packed my bag and I walked out, and I never went back. And the week before that, I taught a kind of a preemptive lesson to my year nines, and I'd seen that what the next lesson was in my kind of Holocaust pack that I'd been given was to teach about, I'm sorry, I'm going to get emotional, to teach to what the Nazis did to disabled children in Germany. And one of the girls in that room, like I'd prepped them, because this is like, I'm talking to disabled children. I'm a carer of a disabled child. I knew that was going to be a challenging lesson, and I talked to them a bit about it and what was going to happen. And one of the girls said, "Oh, I'm really going to struggle." And I said, me too. I'm really going to struggle with this. And in the end, I never actually taught that lesson, because that was due that afternoon, the day that I walked out. And I don't think at the time I knew that. And it wasn't like that was the reason why. But when I looked back, I was like, I knew I just couldn't do that. I knew, and then looking back now, I'm absolutely shocked that I was put in that position where, as a parent of a disabled child, I was going to be asked to teach about euthanizing disabled children without any support, without any support for the children. Like, the kind of the callousness of it and the lack of care. Just now I'm out of the environment, I'm like, oh my gosh, we can't treat people like this. So through January, my anxiety had been rising.
Can I just pause you there for a moment, because I'd like you to take a breath more than anything. I'd just like you to take a breath, because I don't think you can share an experience of what you've gone through like that, and then just segue straight in. So, Sarah, you and I will just react to what has been. I've worked out in my head 4 months, take away 2 weeks for Christmas, take away a week for October half term. Talking what, 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 12 weeks, okay? And in those 12 weeks, every single thing that can be done to a human being to make it almost impossible for them to thrive environmentally, practically, emotionally, has been isolation, lack of light. I just think Sarah doesn't get to know the story beforehand. I always meet with the guests beforehand, and I'm very, very interested to see the absolute in the moment reaction, Sarah, to what you've just, because we've listened to some experiences, but 13 weeks of that. Go on, Sarah, what's your thoughts?
I've written down psychologically not safe. In fact, it's beyond that. Psychologically, that's almost harm with intent.
Yeah.
Or harm through omission of any sort of compassion or understanding of you as a human being. I have words that I'm not going to use on our podcast. They would get me kicked out of my own group. But I'm stunned. I'm genuinely stunned.
I'm sure there's people listening to this who are in positions of leadership teams at school, and they would want to apologise to you for what you went through, because nobody should have to go through that. And really, can I thank you for sharing that, to be honest, because how you did, I have no idea. To me, to be streaming kids in 2020, in the 21st century. So let me get this right. I'm a top set English, but I'm middle set maths. So where do I go? Where is this holding any individual at the helm? And I will say this, and we'll move on. Shame on them. That's all I'm going to say about this. Shame on them.
Can I ask a question? Was it an academy?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I am going to timestamp this because I don't know quite when this will come out in the sequence of things, but it's early November, and this week there's been an article published in Schools Week with a quote from Sir Kevin Collins, who is the school standards czar, whatever that means. But he has actually been looking at academy freedoms and what it should have brought. And his quote this week is that he has never seen teachers more enslaved.
Wow.
With teachers, quote, being told what to do in every lesson. So I'm listening to you in terms of, and I'm just going to rewind. I'd written health and safety down about the condemned building. You should never have been put in there. And then I'm hearing about the lack of creativity, and that's what I was busy doing. I was trying to find that quote, and then you talk to me about what you have to teach and that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. As a parent, right? So as a parent, you're telling me my kid's being taught in a condemned building, my kid's disabled, and my kid has to go through that lesson. Because I'll tell you something. I might have kowtowed as a teacher, but as a parent, I'd have had them by the throat for that. 100%.
I used to say to the kids, I said, you need to be telling your parents to email in, because it's the only thing that's going to make a change. Yeah. But then to my bottom set year 9s, they haven't got that kind of, their parents don't have that social capital. They were the condemned group. And I loved them dearly, actually. They're the ones that I think about most, even though they were the hardest ones. At one point, one of the girls sprayed, the fluid you keep to wipe your board, sprayed that in my face. And there was no one around. There's no support at all. And she should have had one-to-one, and she never did. And we would just have to deal with that. But it was them I felt sorriest for, because she didn't want to behave in that way. And she needed help to not behave in that way. And the school were just streaming them to keep them out then from the top set, so the top set could thrive and bugger to the rest of them.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're the manifestation of everything that is wrong with the SEND system, and you'll know that as a parent as well. And the academy system and poor leadership. You've almost, I'm sorry to kind of reduce it to this, but you've almost ticked every single box that we encounter on a daily and a weekly basis in the group.
Yeah.
That's too much for one person in 12 weeks.
Yeah. The anxiety that I kind of plummeted into, I was ill. I was really ill. And so going back then to that day, that morning, I knew I really shouldn't have gone in. I'd had the day, it was a Wednesday. I'd had the Tuesday off because I'd had another interview booked. But I cancelled that interview because I was just too mentally unwell. But this is where I'm not a religious person, but sometimes I wish I was, because it would make more sense of things. So that was probably getting towards my lowest days. I had a phone call from a really lovely sounding lady from the civil service who'd I'd almost forgotten at this point I was on this reserve list, saying that, they were looking for someone to join their team, and they'd had a look at my application and I sounded great, and would I like to work with them? And they sounded so lovely, and I could start, they could be flexible. I could start after Easter, blah, 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 all the nice things. And it wasn't a formal offer. All that was still to come. I had to go through all the checks and stuff. For the first time, I just felt there was a glimmer of hope. And I remember taking my dog for a walk and ringing my friend and just crying, because I thought, I'll be able to walk my dog. I'll be able to see like actual light. I'll be able to, like, I've moved to this beautiful place and I've not seen any of it because I'm locked in a box. And they were like, yes, you can work from home. You can be flexible. And so that was the Monday. So Tuesday I had booked off because of this other interview. I cancelled that because I just couldn't, even though that wasn't a formal job offer. I couldn't
function. You couldn't function.
And I just walked for miles. My poor dog. I walked for miles. When with that anxiety, you just need to give it an outlet. And I've walked about like 10 miles over those 2 days, dragging my poor dog behind me. And then on the Wednesday, kind of just back into that routine without really thinking, go, 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 go. And I got to the school car park, and I was texting. I've got two beautiful teacher friends from Birmingham, that are still my two kind of best friends, and we have a group. Obviously, all women are in one group with 3 women, aren't they? And I was texting them saying I didn't remember the drive to work. Like, I was just in such a state of anxiety. I just couldn't remember what I'd done. And they were saying, just go, don't go in. You are not well. Go home, speak to the GP. And I sat in the car, and I don't know why, but I decided to go in. And like, I was just in this, I was clearly not well. I taught, and I say that with inverted commas, taught period 1, because it definitely wasn't my finest hour. I don't think I did much teaching, but we got through it. And then I was free period 2. And I knew it was just like, like the way you push up to get out of a drowning pool. I just knew I had to, my legs just took me out of that building. And I packed my bag and I walked to the office, and I said, you're going to need to cover me for the rest of the day because I'm leaving site. And I was clearly like anxious. I was in a state of anxiety. And the office staff just looked at me and went, well, we couldn't cover you for period 5, so you have to come back for that. And I said, no, I'm leaving. I'm not coming back. And I got in my car and I was shaking so much, but I knew I needed to get off site. So I drove to, like, there's a big like shopping centre not too far from the school. So I thought, if I can just get there, then I'm off site and then I'll be okay. So I drove to this car park and I rang my GP, and straight away, they kind of booked me in for the afternoon. They said, and I rang my friends and they said, just get home. So about 11 o'clock, I think I couldn't get back in the car. So I ended up going shopping. I think I bought shoes. When he's like, well, I think I bought my little Boyson trainers, got back in the car, got home. My husband was working. Was like, what have you done? And I was like, I've just walked out. I've left. And he went, good, was his reaction.
And what I would probably say at that point, when you were describing leaving the building and everything you've done through, and this is the English teacher in me, because it's been triggered at the start by the image of the prison. You've been teaching in a cell. You've had no natural light. You've been then been put on death row in a condemned part of the prison. And what you've just described there for me wasn't leaving your job, it was escaping. It's a breakout. I mean, Jesus Christ, this is teaching. What the hell is going on here?
I know. And when I told when my kind of colleagues, so like my two best friends knew what was going on and knew how it had gone. But when then my other colleagues from my previous schools found out what had happened, they just couldn't believe it, because they'd have never assumed that I'd have done that. So like the teacher I was, and because of their lack of care, and like Sarah said, you said that harm to intent, and I actually think it's a really good way to put it. They never got me. They never knew who I was, and the kids never got me as well.
Have you read the book Teach, Survive, Repeat by Mark Rickard? It is a blisteringly honest expose of life behind the staff room door. Far from the inspirational posters and recruitment campaigners, this unapologetic book dives into the harsh truths of modern teaching, where burnout, toxic leadership, and data-driven madness have replaced passion, purpose, and pedagogy. Through unflinching personal accounts and anonymised testimonies, Mark Rickard reveals the emotional toil, institutional failures, and systemic injustices that define the teaching profession in the UK. Part memoir, part manifesto, Teach, Survive, Repeat is both a survival guide and a wake-up call, a must-read for educators, policymakers, and anyone who still believes the system is working. Now available in paperback and ebook, and I've got it on my coffee table.
It's interesting you say that, because Sarah walked out of her job. She did exactly what you did, handbag on her shoulder. This is a woman, right, who drives me insane with her need to stick to the rules, okay? So, for example, if we were in an empty building and it said keep to the left, and we were in a deserted building, she would have to keep to the left. So, Sarah, you understand the extremity of something that's so out of character. How bad must it have been? And I think what Hannah did was something that chimed with you. You were saving yourself, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, just to extend how ridiculous I am with rules, I learned the Great Cross Code when I was a kid. I still now walk to the dip in the curb
She does.
to cross the road.
She does.
I will not cross the road from a high curb.
Drives me mental.
But yeah, I think something kicks in. I think something really primal kicks in about self-preservation, doesn't it? And I think you and I probably had some sort of parallel moment where I went back to my office, I swept my bag up, I walked out the building, and I just said, I'm going, to the ladies in the office, and that was it.
I had to, I absolutely, I was saving myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're out. You've got this glimmer of hope. You're still not well. There's no two ways about that. What happens next?
I spoke to the GP. They were brilliant. I think they heard teacher and went, okay, how long do you want to be off for? Which I was really grateful for. They put me in touch with some support services. One of my old friends from home, who I hadn't spoke to for years and years and years, but kind of friends on social media, he'd kind of gone off and done hypnotherapy. And I remember seeing like him put something out about hypnotherapy for anxiety. And I thought, I really want to do that. I really want to give that a try. So I had this kind of signed off work. I was still waiting for this job offer to come through from the civil service so I could have my notice in. So originally I was kind of, I'll just be off till February half term and then we'll kind of work it out. So I was doing this hypnotherapy and it was so powerful, and I'd recommend it to anyone. It was absolutely brilliant. And he said things that just helped me put it into such perspective, because everything was like piling on top of me in my head. It was everything about the school, and it was everything that I hadn't dealt with from the trauma of my son's birth, because he had a stroke at birth and being in the neonatal unit and, being close to death. And then we'd had COVID, and he'd said like, well, your anxiety is there because you've helped your family survive and you survive, and now you can let it go. And I was like, ooh, you've just hit the nail on the head. Like, that's exactly it. Like, this energy and this mad anxiety I'm feeling, has been exactly what was needed, because it helped me get through everything we've gone through as a nation, but also me personally over the past 4 years. But I'm in a safe place now. And I really felt like when we moved up here, we live in this beautiful village, and we both me and my husband kind of really feel like this is our safe place. And I just really could feel that starting to release. And then the glimmer of light got stronger, and I got all my checks through from the civil service, and I got a formal job offer, and I was able to have my notice in. And I was still planning to go back and try and do the last 6-7 weeks between February and half term and Easter, because of course I'm a teacher. I've got to go and do the work. I've got to follow the rules. I've got to do it. And I could just feel like the anxiety rising again. And I spoke to the GP, and they were brilliant. And they said, well, if you've handed your notice in anyway, let me sign you off until then.
But isn't it bizarre that we've just used the analogy of I was fighting for my life? It was at a prison break. Oh, by the way, at no point in a prison break movie do they go back in and hand themselves back in and clean the cell and finish off their sentence.
That was it. I was like, I've got to do it, because I'm a teacher and the kids need me, and I'm being paid, and all that. And it was the GP that kind of gave me the permission to just go, but if you've handed your notice in and you're still not well. And I was like, and then so I had this time to recover, and then obviously it's becoming spring, and just life is starting to feel a bit more manageable. Yeah.
It's that thing about it, permission. That's a really interesting word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I'm feeling so many parallels between what you have. It's different, but similar, because I had an amazing GP, and when I walked in, very similar. Completely unsurprised by the story that was told, and categorically went, you're not going back. You're not going back. And actually the permission at that point was what I needed to justify my catastrophic. Like I've just thrown a bomb into our whole world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often feel really, really sorry for the stories that we hear a lot on our Facebook group of the people who are saying, oh, no, my husband or my partner or my wife doesn't understand why I need to leave. And because I have a really supportive husband. His mum is a primary school teacher, so he gets it. And he saw how ill it was making me. And at first there was a lot of conversation about, well, what are we going to do for money? Come on. But then I think he saw how ill it was making me. And like I say, when I walked back home on that Wednesday at 11 a.m, he could have hit the roof, because we'd just taken out this huge mortgage on a lovely house in Yorkshire. And instead he went, well done.
And that's what my husband did, was a phone call, and he was like, whatever you need.
Yeah.
And I was the breadwinner. He wasn't.
Yeah.
It makes a world of difference when you've got somebody to catch you.
And I think if you don't have that, then you've got to be the permission for yourself. And I think listening to these stories and hearing other people's experiences on that group is so powerful, because I think then we can all hold each other up. We can give you permission. We know how bad it is. We know how much this is hurting your brain and hurting your health. Get out.
And I think with permission, it's not just permission, oh, it's okay to do it. It's permission to do it and then not have all the associated negative emotions that come with it. It's okay to do it. You're not a failure. It's okay to do it. You've nothing to be ashamed of. It's not shame on me. It's shame on them. But when you're sat there, you feel ashamed, and it's all of those emotions. So right, you've got light at the end of the tunnel. Again, you've come from the darkened cell, light at the end of the tunnel. It's spring. Oh, there's so much going on symbolically here, love. We've got it nailed, this story.
It was beautiful. It was a really lovely spring. I spent months and months doing the garden. I've never done gardening before. And I spent months doing the gardening. And I listened to loads of podcasts, and I just kind of felt my brain just starting to return. Like I started having ideas, and I started feeling creative, and I was thinking of different ways I could do different things. And then, so I start this new job with the civil service, and it took a while to transition. But I think because I'd given myself the time to have a break, I kind of was ready to do something. I was ready to start, and just being met with kindness and being met with like transparency, and there's no hidden agenda, and people want you to do well and they help you to do well and they have the time to help you to do well. They celebrate when you're doing well. And I loved it. I loved it from the minute I started. So I started working in children's social care and for the civil service, so not with local authorities. And it was from the start, it was just a really positive experience. And I really then also could still feel like I was adding value, which was so important to me. Like that was, like I said to you at the beginning, like as a teacher, that was everything to me. And the shame that I felt in leaving was really palpable. Now I've turned that, it's not, like you say, it's shame on them. And I can see that now, but it's taken me a while to get there. And so, yeah, being able to pursue a new job and a new kind of career field for me, but still doing something that's supporting vulnerable people, that's still helping. And then, so just as like an example, so right from the get-go, I started the civil service the week where Jacob Rees-Mogg kicked up a fuss about nobody working in offices and everyone working from home. And I'd been told I could pretty much work from home. And my office was placed in Darlington, and I'm near like York and Leeds. So it was about an hour and a half commute. So that was my kind of first experience was, oh my gosh, they're going to make me come to Darlington every day. And this is a 3-hour round trip for me. And I've left teaching so that I can be at home more and I can pick my child up from school when he starts school next year. And so I kind of tearfully got on the phone to my new line manager, like this is maybe 3 days in. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm probably going to have to look for a job elsewhere. And she said, well, talk to me about it. I said, well, I can't do the commute to Darlington, even 2 times a week. Like I could manage it maybe once a week. And I was saying, I left teaching so that I could be around for my child. He's got cerebral palsy. And she went, stop you there. She said, oh, I didn't know that your child had cerebral palsy. She said, so you should talk to me about that. And this is like 3 days in, she's put in place this formal structure. We call it a carer's passport that details all the support that I might need as a carer to support my child. One of those was about flexible working. So I am like, no matter who my line manager is, I'm entitled to flexible working so I can take him to appointments and not be docked pay. I get paid leave for his appointments because we have that policy in place. So quite often what I would do is I would kind of work through, because I'm a teacher who needs a lunch break. So I kind of work through till 3 o'clock. Then I'd log off at 3 and spend 3 till 6 with my children because that's flexible. And then I'd pick up the hours again in the evening. And I was able to work from home so that I can be around. And that was within 3 days of starting in the civil service. I was just met with compassion and empathy, but like not over, like these people were like, this is just standard. This is just like, it wasn't like they were being so kind. This is what you can expect. This is what you should have been expecting all along.
I wrote down, Hannah, again, a quote from you: being met with kindness, transparency, and people who wanted you to do well. And then I put my own thing on it, which is this should be normal, not a revelation.
Yeah.
Because it clearly is normal in places.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. And my first draft of this carer's passport versus what I write now is almost laughable, because the first one I wrote was very much with my teacher head on, where I was apologizing for the fact that I might need this time, and I would try and do this, and I might need a day off, and then I'd make sure I'd make it up here, there, this kind of like kowtowing, and this like what? Like I read it now and I'm like, who was that woman? Yeah. Why was I apologizing for the fact that my child is disabled? Why was I apologizing for that fact? And so now it's just statement of fact. You will give me X, Y, and Z because that is what I am entitled to, because that's what my son needs and that's what I need.
That's beautiful.
But yeah, it's that, and I accepted it for far too long as a teacher, but we all do. We all do. No different, and we wanted the best for the children we teach, so we just accept it.
You're still venturing in the world of education because you are taking up a position. Here's the beautiful irony: in the prison service, and you've now got an experience that you can bring, having served hard time in a school for 14 weeks. And I know this is a new position, so we don't really need to go into too much detail. Are you excited about taking up the position?
so excited. So the design, so in civil service, you know, a lot of people I know look at those jobs. There's often essential criteria, desirable criteria. The essential criteria was, you know, all the kind of the basic stuff around policy development, stakeholder management. I didn't know what a stakeholder was until 2.5 years ago, but here we are, stakeholder management. And then in the desirable criteria, it said qualified teacher status. And I just knew, like, this is for me. And in the interview, the feedback I got from the interviewer was, it is so refreshing to interview someone who hasn't come just through the civil service, who's got experience outside, because of the way you answer questions, we can sense your passion. And it was just what you want to hear, because that was my fear leaving teaching was, am I going to find somewhere that, you know, that kind of likes my passion and that gets why I'm like committed and why I like that drive. So to hear that as feedback, but also like financially, oh my gosh, like I'm getting paid more than I was as a teacher now, and I work 37 hours a week. So when you factor in my hourly wage, oh my gosh, and I do that over 4 days.
Wow.
I'm a full-time employee. I do it over 4 days. I get paid more than I was as a teacher. You know, it's
And I'll tell you this for nothing. Having gone through what you went through only for that short space of time, I bet there's not a single person listening to this who got it. And that bloody girl deserves that. You absolutely deserve that. So with that in mind, my friend, I am going to ask you to share with us a sliding doors moment that you've experienced since leaving the classroom that you know you would not have been able to do had you have remained in teaching. Thanks, Hannah.
Okay, so this one is maybe going to be a slightly longer one than others have done. And I will give a bit of a content warning for any listeners that I will be talking about cancer. So, as I said, I'm a carer to my son. And I share that responsibility with my husband, my dear husband, who is only the same age as me, so mid-30s, young and healthy and fit. And through COVID, started having back pain and went to the GP a number of times, but it was, oh, you're sitting on the wrong chairs, you know, and we were, because suddenly he had to start working from home. He was working at a dining room table. So we spent money and got him a proper chair and desk and rising desk, etc. We moved up to Yorkshire and the pain was getting worse. So I think kind of like another mental strain I had through the time I was at school was this kind of beginning of shift of my relationship with my husband, where he was just in pain, this kind of like constant discomfort, and his mood was starting to change. When I started at the civil service, so I started in May 2022, he'd been in significant pain for a while. I'd nearly rang an ambulance for him in March 2022, but it was around the time where they were saying if you ring an ambulance, you might be, you know, in an ambulance bay for like 48 hours while we wait for you to go to hospital. It was all through this time, and I thought, he'll never forgive me. He's in so much pain. If he's stuck in an ambulance for 48 hours, he'll never forgive me. And I didn't. But the GP finally referred him for an MRI after agreeing it might be something more, you know, more than just sitting on the wrong chair. So he had his MRI just before I started the civil service in August. So I was, May, June, July, August. I was 4 months in. So it's a 6-month probation. In August bank holiday, we were down with his parents, and we got a phone call on the Friday afternoon just before bank holiday weekend to say, we've looked at your MRI and we can see that there's a slipped disc. And we were like, oh, almost we were a bit disappointed, because he'd been in so much pain that we were thinking, surely like that's not going to be the level of pain you're in, but hey, maybe it just is. I was thinking like, oh, bloody men, it's a slipped disc. And he's just like, at this point, like he wasn't sleeping, he was like losing weight, his hair was falling, like he was so ill with this pain. And anyway, on the Tuesday morning, we were just packing up to go back home. And on the Tuesday morning, we had another phone call, and it was the same GP. And she said, oh, I'm really sorry. The MRI report was sent in 2 parts, and I read the top, and it was done in 2. And she said, I just read the top, and the top does show a slip disc, but it shows a slip disc because there's a well, they never said the word tumor. They said mass, a lesion that essentially was pushing his disc out. So the top MRI did show a slip disc, but the bottom MRI showed why. That was the beginning of our cancer journey. And it took a while for diagnosis, and it took a while for because he's got a very, 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 and had a very, very, very rare form of bone cancer. So this is, in terms of my career, I'm 6 months into the civil service and dealing with this news. I've taken a pay cut. So I started at SEO level at the civil service, which is senior executive officer level, which actually is a really good entry grade for the civil service and does pay well. And I'd recommend any teacher to enter into, that grade or HO are really good entry grades and still pay fairly amount. But it was less than I was being paid as a teacher, and his salary was what we lived off, and we just bought our kind of forever home in Yorkshire, and we'd taken out a huge whacking great mortgage to have this with. Ironically, to afford the mortgage, we'd also cancelled our critical care cover that would have paid off our mortgage had one of us got cancer, because we'd said to each other jokingly, we're only in our mid-30s, like, how likely is it that we'll get cancer? So we'd cancel our critical care cover because that was really expensive. So he got in September, we were sent down to Birmingham, back to Birmingham, for no link in terms of because we used to live there, just because that was the centre. We were sent down to Birmingham, and we were told it was likely to be malignant cancer. They were very worried about it being malignant cancer. And the way that they diagnose sarcoma, which is bone cancers, is that they start with they take a biopsy, and then they start kind of profiling it against the most common, and there's about 100 types, and so it can take about a week if it's one of the more common ones, or it can take a few weeks if it's one of the less common ones. And it was, for us, it took weeks, because it was one of the least common cancers. He's got a type of cancer called mesenchymal chondrosarcoma, which is a very rare cancer, a very aggressive cancer. We were given this news in October, so I just about passed my probation period with my team, and we were told that he was going to need a life-altering surgery. We didn't know kind of to what extent that life would be altered. We were told it'd be a life-altering surgery. And then we were told with a likely need to have 9 months of chemo and radiotherapy following that. So we were kind of going into Christmas 2022 with that knowledge. So he had his surgery booked for the end of November 2022. So at this point, I've been there 6 months. He was down in Birmingham. The surgery was very dangerous. I didn't know this. I've never seen it, but he filmed like a goodbye to me and my children before, because we didn't know how that was going to go. My line manager, but I was still in teaching mode, right? So I said to my line manager, well, he's having his surgery on the Wednesday, so I'll take Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off, and I'll see you on Monday. And she just said, if you need to work, I'll see you on Monday. But otherwise, come back and see me in January, and we'll see how you are. And without any question, she just signed me off on full pay for 5 weeks. And I'd only been there for 6 months. I'd only just passed my probation. And she just said, don't worry about it. You said, if you want to log on and work because that's good for you, then do. But just come back and see me in January. And obviously I couldn't work, and he was really ill after the surgery, and we had a rough few weeks. And I was just so grateful that I was not having to worry about cover lessons. And so he came home, and we got home just before Christmas, and we had the weirdest Christmas. All his family came, and they all cooked and kind of celebrated as you can. He doesn't remember any of it because he was on so many pain meds. But we got through. On Boxing Day, we went to Leeds Sarcoma Centre, where they were going to do his chemotherapy. And they told us that we needed to have the full 9-month regime. And they were going to give him, for those who know about cancer, they were going to give him the doxorubicin, which is called the Red Devil, which is, I think, the most powerful chemo drug there is. And it was going to make him very ill. And he was going to be very immunocompromised. And for me, that's where then the sliding doors moment starts, because straight away, I was due back to work in January, but I was really kind of on and off because I was needing to take him to all these appointments while we kind of got ourselves settled. So there's kind of two big things. One of them was around his health and this immunocompromise. And I remember keep on thinking, what would I have done if I was in school? Because I would have killed him if I'd have gone into school. But then there's no mechanism for me to not have gone into school and still earn money. And he's been off work now from November. This is January. So we're 3 months into his 6 months full pay, sick. He had 5 months full pay. So we're 3 months into his 5 months full pay. Then he was dropping to half pay, then nothing. So I knew we're going to be okay for a few months. We can pay our mortgage and our bills. But I'm going to need to step up and I'm going to need to earn more money now, because otherwise we're going to have to sell this house. And actually when we kind of first got his diagnosis, I was thinking we are going to have to sell this house. There's no other way around it. Like how I've only just started this new career. How can I earn more money? But from the minute I started the civil service, they'd seen me and they'd seen my potential. And from kind of day one, they'd gone, you should have been a grade 7, which is then the next grade above. And it's quite a significant pay jump between SEO and grade 7. It's about a £15,000 pay jump. So it's a huge increase. They're like, why did you come in as an SEO? You should have been a grade 7. So already I had this like positive talk in my head that I was capable of this. And I spoke to my line manager kind of in January. This is after just coming back from, 6 weeks of leave, supporting my husband. And I said, I'm going to need to leave this team because I'm going to need a promotion, because I've got no option. Like I have to earn the money to support my family. We cannot lose our house on top of everything. So in the kind of worst months of my husband's treatment, so he had the doxorubicin. He was on a chemotherapy regime that was 1 week on, 1 week off. So he'd be home for a week. But there was a period through end of January, early February, where his cell counts were so low they didn't let him home, and he'd lost so much weight. They were talking about like feeding him through a tube because he was so poorly. And through that period, I was applying for grade 7 jobs, and my line manager was supporting me every step of the way. She was helping me draft them. She was coaching me for interviews. She was that constant, you're going to be brilliant. You're going to do it. I applied for a lot of jobs. I got 2 interviews. The first interview I missed by 1 mark. It's almost like a test. I missed it by 1 mark. The context in the morning was that was when my husband was in hospital with sepsis. And so I was quite pleased that I'd only missed it by 1 mark, to be honest. And then I got called for a second interview in a different role, and I was not offered the job. I was offered to go back on the reserve list, and the reserve list has come back to save my life again, because, as luck would have it, then my own team had a vacancy for a grade 7. So I was able to stay in the team that had supported me, but as a grade 7. So that, for me, my sliding doors moment is, if I was teaching while all this had happened, and if that school hadn't been as bad, so if I'd have managed to stay for a year, we would have been homeless. We'd have been bankrupt. Like, what could we have done? We'd have both had to be signed off work. So my pay would have run out the same time that my husband's pay would have run out. And we'd have had nothing no money that would have supported us. We'd have had to sell our house. We'd have had to move. We'd have probably had to go and live with parents through the worst times of our life. And instead, I am in a career that fulfills me, that really, through some really dark times last year, became like a really positive outlet. I never thought work could be that for me, in a way, because teaching made it so negative towards the end. But it's my positive outlet. Like, I get to direct all of my nervous energy into doing good and doing amazing things, and really supporting vulnerable people, and develop myself and have something that gives me something back of who I am and who I was all through that time. And I cannot thank my team and my line managers at the civil service enough for just how they've met me with that flexibility, and with that, we know what you're going through, and that openness to talk about it. But at the same time, without it being, oh, aren't we doing you a favor? It's never been that. it's just been, of course, that's what you need. Of course, that's what you're going to get. Of course, we'll give it to you. So that's my sliding doors. It's not a moment, but that's my sliding doors of life. And it's, so not only did walking out that day save me, but it saved my family, and it saved our house, and it saved our future.
Wow. Can I just ask how your husband is now?
Oh yes, sorry, good news. Yeah, so so in September 2023, we had kind of the end of treatment scans, and they came back clear. There's been a long road. He's had to have another surgery because of complications from the first surgery that they could never resolve because of the chemo and the radiotherapy. So he recently had another surgery, but he's healed now, and we're off to Centre Parks on Monday because now I'm not a teacher. I'm gonna go to holidays.
Hannah.
So yeah, we're nearly a year and a half cancer free, and the way I look at it is, we've just been given the biggest gift of all, because he was dying and we didn't know. He was being killed in front of our eyes and we didn't know. And they found it, and it took a while, and there was issues with that, but they found it. They got it out. They blasted his body so that it hopefully won't return. So like, it sounds really naff, but it genuinely is. Every day we have is a gift that we weren't going to have. Like, we just have a life now. And even if it comes back, and there's a really high chance it does come back, the type of cancer he's got is an absolute horrible beast. He's had more time. He's had time with us. He's had time with the boys to watch them grow. We've had time together, you know, and financially we're much more secure than we would have been 2 years ago. So yeah, it's a total gift. And I did sit down once and work out the odds. So my little boy had a stroke, which is pretty rare, but it's not completely rare. It's about I think there's about like 0.8% of all children have a stroke in utero. So it's like, it does happen. And then I couldn't get a proper stat on my husband's cancer because there's so few cases that it's not really recorded. So like, best guess is that he's around the 800 known case of this type of cancer. So there's like, absolutely, like, we as a family, we are statistically incredibly unlucky. But I've always said that makes it, actually, we're the luckiest, because we know what matters. We know how important love is. We know how important time is. We can cut through the bullshit a bit. I think that just I think we're incredibly lucky.
And we have been incredibly lucky to spend time with you today. And on behalf of myself and Sarah and all of our listeners, I want to extend the biggest thank you to you for sharing your story. And I am sure there are many people out there who will take the inspiration from it that we have. Hannah Jones, thank you for spending time with us today. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you, listeners. Normally Sarah and I go straight into the epilogue, but we both had to take a little bit of a minute in order to catch our breath after Hannah's story, because I listen to pit pony stories all the time in my role in Life After Teaching and the support that we do. But there were points throughout that story where I couldn't contain my anger. I've got to be honest with you, Sarah, I was just enraged at certain points, particularly the room and her circumstances was bad enough, but the lesson for Holocaust Day, I didn't think I was going to be able to contain myself.
It's funny because at the point where we were talking about that, it's not funny. I actually, a fleeting thought went through my head, and I know I've said this to you before, that I sometimes have this like ticker tape of a running monologue in my head. Mm-hmm. And I just thought I would love to put some of these people in a room and ask them what the hell they think they are doing. And that's me being very measured. You know what my actual language would be.
I know that was a killer for me as well. And it was sitting in front of that, a teacher or whoever thought that was okay and said, if I'd have presented you with the scenario at the age of 22 when you were going into teaching, Mr. or Mrs. Head Teacher, and gave you that scenario that a history teacher with a disabled child who was already expressing real struggles within your school, you had directed her to deliver that lesson. Because I have to believe that 22-year-old head teacher going into the profession would have been still able to see how morally wrong and abhorrent that was. What has happened to you over the course of your career that you have become so desensitized to the needs of the basic human needs of your fellow professionals that you think that's okay? Shame on you.
And that comes back to and it will stay in my notebook, and I will probably write it down on a piece of paper and have it over my desk. That we talk about things that are normalized, and actually I have to remember it's not all leaders, it's not everybody. I have to remember that. But it almost feels like, because we are hearing people's stories and because we are in the echo chamber of our group, that it almost has become normalized to be met with people who are so desensitized to general human compassion that they're robotic. And the irony is not lost on me that they follow a set of rules that suits them in terms of employment legislation or the HR policy or the attendance or the absence policy or whatever, but they don't follow the rules of law in quite a lot of cases in terms of employment law and people's rights. And it just really struck me when she said to me, and I will say it again, being met with kindness, transparency, and people who wanted you to do well. That should be normal. That should not be a revelation to somebody in their mid-30s when they go into a new career.
I mean, the peak irony that the thought of the lesson that broke her was how appallingly an organisation, the Nazi organisation, was treating people with disability. I mean, let's just sit with that for a moment. How little they valued people with disability, and the mother of a disabled child was not met with compassion in the midst of a lesson that is serving us to never go back and to let that period of history teach us to be better. I mean, the irony bucket's going ping, ping, ping. What on earth are we doing at times in this, what should be the best job in the world? After the call, she talked about wanting to drive into the back of a bus. She had her tree moment. And that's becoming normalised. Oh yeah, I had a tree. I had a bend in the road. I could have stuck my arm out when the train was coming in the morning. I think we get into the point as we get further and further into the pit pony stories. And we're not picking sensationalised.
No.
I'll tell you how we've got pit pony guests. Here's a spoiler for you. We have a thread in our group called Flog It Friday. Or we have people who are commenting on threads offering advice. I'm finding our guests from within our group. These are everyday teachers and pit ponies who have popped their head above the parapet to help and support other teachers. And that was just appalling. Appalling.
The juxtaposition for me of how she described the awfulness of the last 2.5 years in terms of her husband's illness and everything that she went through with that, but was still able to be so positive, even while she was talking about that. But take her back 4 years for a compact period of time, how utterly broken she was. She said, every day I left home in a rush of a morning with my heart breaking. I couldn't spend time with my child. And she was so right. The it's interesting you talk about a room with no windows, because one of my friends will be listening to this who I used to work with, and we both worked in classrooms for nearly a decade with no windows in them. But it was okay. It was okay because they weren't little black holes hidden off somewhere, and we made them nice. And I might be imagining this, I think there might have been a skylight, but it was okay because we weren't trapped in them. She was obviously in somewhere very, very different, because the culture that surrounded that cell was very different than what we experienced. But psychologically, physically, so much wrong with that. And
the solution was, it doesn't matter. We'll put you in a condemned part of the school that's been knocked down while you're on your Christmas break.
And in a school that I would have worked in, the parents would have been, even though we are talking about the same sort of children, the children who had been clustered and almost not forgotten about, but hidden in plain sight. Our parents at the schools that I worked at through my career would have been all over that. They would have been all over that, complaining about the health and safety of their children, never mind the teacher. It does. It beggars belief, that story. It really does. And she came out of it, and you're right. We're learning more and more and more about when you step outside. I loved when she talked about the carer's passport. Yeah.
How she wrote it in the first instance with such low self-worth, of her rights, of what she's entitled to, of what is normal. And she cringed at the most basic things she was asking for, compared to now what she's saying, well, I'm having this, I'm having that, I'm having the other. And I think there are so many teachers who have got these rights, but they have not got the strength to ask for them because they're working in fear. The thought that this was the other one. She used the language of a prison break. She escaped. She got out of the building as quickly as possible. The doctor said to her, "You've resigned. I'll write this off." Still, was so trauma bonded to that job, considered going back in and finishing off. Now, we're sat aghast, but what I do hope, and I really do hope, that somebody listening to that story suddenly has that light bulb moment because of her story and goes, that's me right now. Oh my Lord, that is me right now. What on earth am I doing? Because there is a life outside of teaching. We always temper it. There are some great schools, but if you've touched unlucky and you're not in one, you're never going to fix it from within. As a lone voice singing in the darkness, you're not going to fix it within. So get out. And like she said, pushing herself up to get out of a pool, save yourself. Save yourself. I thought that was a fantastic episode, Sarah. I thought it was a very powerful and moving episode on so many parts. And you know the takeaway for me? When she screeched down the mic, we're going to Centre Parks in school time. And I thought, that's how I'm going to take her episode of the Pit Pony. I'm going to think of her often in Centre Parks, counting her blessings, absolutely loving every single minute of what she's gone through. Because without it, she said, I wouldn't be having this now. So she left us seated in gratitude and I'm very humbled and very grateful and privileged to have been able to listen to the story of Hannah Jones, and I can only begin to imagine the changes she's going to make in the prison service education system in England and Wales. And we wish her and her husband and her kids the very, very best for what the future holds for them. Thank you, my friend. I'll see you on the other side.
Ta-ra.